How's it going, guys? In today's video, I want to show you guys how much it cost me to turbocharge my BMW E36 and how much it could possibly cost you. Stick around. So let's talk turbo build cost. So in this video, again, I wanted to just explain how much this entire turbocharger build cost me personally. And basically I wanted to overview how much a total cost could be, let's say if you went on the cheaper side, if you're on a budget. And then I also wanted to extend it all the way up to the priciest options. Just a disclaimer, the prices that I'm showing here are variable. So like, I don't know how much prices have changed since I've completed my turbocharged build. I want to do my best in order to show you guys what's the ballpark range of a turbocharger build for a BMW E36 specifically. And just for reference for this entire video, anything that is written in red price-wise is what I ended up doing, and anything in green is just like other options that I considered. So the first thing that I had to decide, and the first thing that I would suggest you guys need to decide, is what motor you want to use in the E36, and this is excluding a 2JZ swap or a V8 swap. This is strictly sticking within the E36 platform. So you can either use your motor, you can use an M50 to an S50, and by that I mean any other motor within the E36 platform, all the way to an M3. But the range of prices for those motors, depending on the mileage, goes all the way from $300 to $1,500. I chose to do that route with a spare M50 B25 TU motor, the same motor that's in my car, and that cost me $350 from the junkyard pulled out. The next thing I wanted to think about was what was going to be inside the motor. So you could start out with a stock motor, and from what I've read on the forums, the stock motors are safe up to around 8 PSI of boost. This is mainly because the stock head gasket is a softer material, so that if you were to move to the next step and let's say get an MLS multi-layered steel head gasket or a cut ring gasket, the material is much tougher, and combined with ARP head studs for about $500, it's going to maximize the clamping and structural integrity of the motor as a whole, so it can withstand higher boost pressures. If you choose to get an MLS head gasket or a chromatic head gasket, you are going to have to resurface the cylinder head, which is the top part of the motor, the top aluminum part of the motor. That usually costs around $100 depending on the machine shop you bring it to. The next step up from ARP head studs or an MLS cut ring head gasket or whatever you choose is actually taking the block all the way apart. And if you guys haven't seen the video of me taking apart an entire M50, I'll link the video up there. But essentially, if you decide to do anything more than an ARP head stud or an MLS cut ring gasket, whatever, you're going to have to machine the block. And basically that includes line boring it, honing it, resurfacing it, basically cleaning out the entire motor and making sure that it is squared off within the correct acceptable tolerance range of a couple thousandths of an inch. And that costs up to about $1,500 depending on the machine shop you want to bring it to. So after you complete the engine block machining process, you now have the option to choose forged rods and pistons. And essentially, forged rods and pistons are stronger than the stock components and are designed to withstand higher temperatures and higher boost or internal combustion chamber pressures, so that you can maximize the horsepower output with a turbocharger. If you're going to stay around 500 horsepower or less, you don't need to do forged internals, in my opinion. But if you choose to do forged rods and pistons, it's going to cost about $2,000 at the most. If you can find them for cheaper, good for you. And in addition to that, the next step above forged internals is actually upgrading the entire cylinder head valve train. VAC Motorsports or VAC Motorsports has stage 2, stage 3 valve train kit that you can just send your cylinder head in, and they'll take care of it for you. After you decide what you want to do with the motor, you also have to consider the rest of the drivetrain, mainly the transmission. So the cheapest option that you can go for is an eBay clutch, because once you have more horsepower, the stock clutch is not going to be able to handle that whatsoever, or not going to be able to handle it for long. So your best bet is to at least get something that's like stage 2, stage 3. So the next upgraded option from a stage 2 clutch would be like known brands like South Bend, Gretty, ACT, or etc. And those clutch kits can cost up to about $900 if you include like a flywheel or something like that. And in addition to the clutch kit itself, you actually have to, in my opinion, just maintain the shifter and transmission parts like D10 springs, all the seals, shifter seals. You might as well do the input shaft bearings, and you might as well do a fluid change, and that costs up to about $150 depending on what you choose to do. Upgrade all the shifter bushings as well, because if you're going to put in the effort to change all the engine parts and put a turbo build, you might as well just service the transmission with the clutch kit that you choose to purchase. So after the drivetrain mods are complete, you want to start thinking about the electronics. So the first thing that I just started thinking about was what gauge I'm going to need. Obviously, you're going to need a wideband O2 sensor with an AFR gauge so you can measure how much air to fuel ratios come out of the turbo, so you know that the tune is good or the motor is running healthily. And then in addition to that, just like a boost gauge as well. That cost me around $300. And the wideband O2 sensor for the AEM wideband gauge that I chose was about $75. So once you have like essentially the supplemental parts around the motor that you need, now you have to start thinking about which actual kit you want to actually get. So the cheapest kits out there on the market are again on eBay. So obviously the CX Racing kit was considered, but if you're not going to use this car on the street, yeah, you could cheap out and get the CX Racing kit, but in my opinion, the CX Racing eBay kit is not the most street-friendly kit long-term. Mainly because the parts that are in that kit, in my opinion, I don't really trust it. I bought their universal intercooler kit for what I'll explain below, and a lot of the parts that came with it weren't, I guess, the best quality that I would have wanted, but I mainly bought an intercooler kit just for the intercooler and the piping. There are a bunch of reputable turbo kits out there. Turbo kits from, let's say, Technique Tuning or Active AutoWorks. Companies like that, they have kits that are all bolt-on, should be ready, and all you need is the tuning session in the end. Those cost up to about $6,500, more or less, give or take 1,000. But you can also do what I did, where you use all these kits as a template, and then source out all the parts in those kits yourself. And that can save you a ton of money. And that's where it saved me the most money. So I can estimate that including all the turbo, manifold, intercooler piping, blow-off valves, stuff like that, it's gonna cost you around $2,500, depending on which brands you choose, etc. But for me, the turbo, manifold, intercooler, and exhaust totaled up to around $1,600. The next thing that you guys are gonna have to consider is what ECU type you're gonna retain. Do you want the stock ECU? Do you want to OBD1 swap it if you have an OBD2 setup on the car? Or if you want to go full standalone ECU. There's a lot of support for stock ECU retention, so you can do a lot of chip flashes or chip replacements in order to compensate for the new timing, new fuel maps that you're going to need for a turbocharger. And those are the cheapest options, and usually the prices for the tuning is included in those kits. But if you want a full standalone, that's going to be the most expensive option. It's going to be $1,000 to $2,000 depending on the kit that you want to get. But those ECUs are going to have the most versatility in terms of tune-wise, what do you want to do, stuff like crazy amounts of like launch control, anti-lag, etc., stuff like that. With a tuning package decided, you have to understand that you have to compensate for dyno time. Regardless of what tuning options you choose, there is going to be a cost of using a dyno, unless you're getting a custom tune. So a bunch of big name companies like Miller Performance, Arcade Tunes, Technique Tuning, a bunch of others that I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but these companies have created kits that include injectors, mass airflow sensors, and then base tunes and chip maps to give you a complete tuning package to get that all sorted out. So they're typically around $1,200 or less, and that's what I chose in the end. And to compensate as well, I needed about 2 hours of dyno time. Second option is to get a custom tune. Now the custom tune is going to be not as expensive price-wise as a kit, but you are going to have to find all those parts yourself, like the injectors, what injectors you want to use, what map you want to use. So after you have decided on all your turbo kit parts, the ECU type, and the tuning package, which would include mass airflow sensor, fuel injectors, or whatnot, you gotta decide on what type of mechanisms you want to supply fuel to the engine. I decided to go with a Walbro 255, which is can support up to around, I think, I want to say 500 horsepower comfortably, but then the size up is the Walbro 485. Those are a little bit more expensive, but at the same time, if you're trying to build a car that is making more than 500 horsepower, definitely go with the biggest fuel pump you can get. In addition to fuel pumps, you're going to have to consider stuff like aftermarket fuel rails and aftermarket fuel pressure regulators. The stock system is fine because a lot of the injectors in these kits bolt in directly. But if you want to get a little bit more reliable flow in the fuel system and have full range pressure adjustability, get the aftermarket fuel rails and the aftermarket fuel pressure regulators. That being said, closing comments. Don't be afraid to overbuild the car. You want to overbuild a car so that you don't decide to, let's say, turn up the boost later and then you don't have the mechanical capacity. In the end, it's worth it to build a car a little bit more than your goal horsepower. And in addition to that, don't be afraid to look on forums and social media. Do a lot of search terms like looking to buy or searching for. You'd be surprised how many people have a lot of parts that you might need if you're building a custom kit. Stuff like turbos. For example, my turbocharger is a Precision 5858. Retail brand new, they're about $1,300, but I found one with 700 miles that a person was willing to let go for $650. So in that case, that saved me a lot of money on my end and brought this custom kit price down a ton. The last point I'm going to make is something that I'm probably going to mention in another video, but it is very important in building a car, that is the factor of safety of the entire car. There are other things besides the drivetrain that I haven't mentioned about, like suspension and subframe reinforcement stuff. And that's something that I'm going to cover for a next video, but it's not relatively important for building a turbocharged vehicle. The final price of my build was $4,975. Now I forgot to include the blow-off valve price and the wastegate price into this, so add about another $600 to that, and the total cost for my build was $5,500. Alright guys, so there you have it. So that is the overview of the cost of my entire turbocharged E36 build. I hope that this gives more people an idea of how much a turbo build could cost and how much you could potentially save if you choose to source parts by yourself or just basically do other means than what's on the market. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope that you found this information helpful. I'll catch you guys in the next one.